on South Central Asia will come to order. The purpose of the hearing is to discuss export controls on semiconductor manufacturing equipment and their subcomponents. I'm going to give myself an opening statement and then turn to the ranking member. Cutting-edge AI chips like NVIDIA Blackwell are driving the AI revolution that may define the 21st century. Less advanced chips, known as foundational chips, power everything from phones and cars to the military drones shaping the battlefields of Ukraine, the Middle East, and potentially the Taiwan Strait. Whichever country dominates semiconductor production will have the power to lead the world. Building these chips requires highly specialized tools. These chip-making tools, often worth billions of dollars, can etch features in chips that are smaller than the width of a strand of human DNA. Not hair, DNA. American, Dutch, and Japanese companies control the vast majority of the market share. If the free world blocked China's access to these machines, America and its allies would control the defining technology of our time. President Trump and his administration understand this based on their public statements. During his first administration, President Trump blacklisted key Chinese semiconductor companies, Huawei and SMIC, and convinced the Netherlands to block China's access to the most advanced chip-making tool in the world, known as the EUV lithography machines. EUV lithography machines are used to make advanced chips like the NVIDIA Blackwells, which power cutting-edge AI tools. Thankfully, President Trump had the foresight to make this move 3 years before ChatGPT unleashed the AI revolution. The Biden administration later expanded on President Trump's export controls to cover other essential tools, slowing Chinese chip production capabilities. Unfortunately, many of the Biden administration's export controls contain critical loopholes, culminating in the administration's ineffective leadership abroad on this issue. Troubling, the Biden administration gave a free pass to key allies who continue to provide Chinese Communist Party with chip-making equipment to this day. Moreover, the United States and its allies continue to provide China with the essential components it needs to build its own tools. America must close these loopholes to stop the Chinese Communist Party from leveraging our technology for its military modernization efforts and pursuit of technological dominance. I believe President Trump is committed to closing these loopholes. On the first day of his second term, President Trump directed State and Commerce to, quote, identify and eliminate loopholes in existing export controls, close quote. The White House's AI action plan, partially written by Mr. Ball here, goes further by recommending export controls on advanced subcomponents used to make chip-making tools, in addition to stopping allies from supplying China's defense industrial base and backfilling U.S. technology. The time to act is now. The Chinese Communist Party is exploiting the loopholes in U.S. export controls to stockpile chip-making tools and critical components while it still can. If left unchecked, the CCP would use its dominance in chip production to modernize its military and build the advanced chips needed to win the AI arms race. Acting quickly and decisively will ensure that China cannot lead the world to a dystopian future where the surveillance state controls virtually all aspects of life. If China becomes the dominant global producer of both chip-making equipment and semiconductors, it will grant the CCP an even more dangerous stranglehold over the United States than it currently has with rare earth magnets today. Congress and the executive branch must quickly act to close the loopholes, thereby ensuring the free world wins the defining technologies of our time or risk ceding it to the future to China. That decision will be critical and crucial to keep the world's most advanced chips out of China's hands and ensure that Silicon Valley, not Shenzhen, remains the center of the AI revolution. And with that, I will now recognize the ranking member from California, Representative Kamlager Dove, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's so cozy up here. And thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I'm so glad that we are shining a light on where the Trump administration's export controls policy is falling short, which is in a number of areas if the frequency of our export controls discussion is any indication. Advanced SME and their sophisticated subcomponents are a particularly important topic. Effective controls are ones that target the strongest choke points in the advanced chip supply chain, and these technologies remain important contenders for those points of leverage. But a year into the Trump administration, continued loopholes are no longer an accidental oversight. They are de facto administration policy. That's because the key obstacle to a more effective controls is Trump himself. Over the past few months, Trump has visibly transformed export controls from a national security tool to a negotiating tool that can be traded away to serve his own political and personal interests. Export controls have fallen victim to the same self-serving deal-making that characterizes the rest of Trump's foreign policy at the expense of U.S. interests. Trump's trade war with China has completely undermined the U.S. exports controls regime. By imposing controls to gain leverage in trade talks, the administration turned export controls into a concession that can be negotiated away. Pausing the 50% affiliates ruling gives Chinese entities a year to create workarounds, reducing the national security benefits in proportion to the economic impact to U.S. companies. Not only that, linking controls to the trade talks has invited Chinese retaliation to a degree that we've never seen, not even under the Biden administration. Trump has tied our hands by giving the PRC an excuse to deem any new export control regulation as a restarting of the larger tariff war. Of course, this is not the first time that this administration has prioritized deal-making with export controls over U.S. national security. Trump rescinded the AI diffusion rule on the same day he arrived in the Middle East to announce unprecedented sales of AI chips to the UAE and Saudi Arabia before any security agreements were put in place. And the day after downplaying the murder of Jamal Khashoggi in the Oval Office, he greenlit the sale of 35,000 NVIDIA Blackwell chips to Saudi Arabia's government-backed AI company, Humane. What the supposed cybersecurity and reporting requirements are, and whether this was even a net benefit for U.S. interests, is an open and very real question. It's almost as if the U.S. export control policy is being driven by personal interests of maybe the president or key advisors, whose crypto company reportedly benefited from a $2 billion investment from the UAE in exchange for the NVIDIA deal. That's why I introduced a state auth amendment requiring an investigation into this apparent quid pro quo, which all of my Republican colleagues voted against. Trump's export control deal-making has even extended into blatantly illegal territory. The 15% fee that Trump is planning to charge NVIDIA and AMD to sell AI chips to China is explicitly outlawed in the Export Controls Reform Act, and for good reason. It would turn export control licenses into pay-to-play arrangements that allow Trump to sideline national security considerations and extort U.S. companies. That's why I introduced my BIS License Fee Prohibition Act with Representative Krishnamurthy, which imposes enforcement mechanisms to compel the administration to follow the law. Again, none of my Republican colleagues have signed on. Trump is doing all of this while pursuing counterproductive immigration policies like the $100,000 fee for H-1B visas that is driving away high-skilled talent that we need to win the AI race. Meanwhile, the PRC has just launched a new K visa to attract foreign talent in science and technology sectors. We all have an interest in ensuring U.S. export controls advance our core national security interests. I am so glad that I'm on the subcommittee and that I work with this chair, who is also incredibly focused on these issues. And I'm glad that this hearing is happening so that we can focus on the fundamental objectives. And I certainly look forward to a robust discussion. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are very pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses with us today, and I deeply appreciate your time and effort to be here with us. Mr. Dean Ball, a senior fellow for the Foundation for American Innovation, who contributed to the Trump administration's AI action plan while serving as a senior policy advisor at the Office of Science and Technology Policy. We also have Mr. Chris McGuire, a senior fellow for China and Emerging Technologies at the Council on Foreign Relations, who shaped export control policy in senior roles across both Trump administrations and the Biden administration. And then finally, Mr. Kevin Wolf, a partner at Aiken Gump, who led export control policy during the Obama administration as the Assistant Secretary for Export Administration at the Bureau of Industry and Security. This committee recognizes the importance of the issues before us and is grateful to have you here speaking with us and sharing your insight and your knowledge. Your full statements will be made a part of the record, and I ask you that you keep your spoken remarks to 5 minutes in order to allow time for members to ask questions. I now recognize Mr. Ball for 5 minutes.
Chairman Huizenga, Ranking Member Kamlager-Dove, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on this vitally important topic. My name is Dean Ball. I'm a senior fellow at the Foundation for American Innovation, where I focus on AI, emerging technologies, public policy, and geostrategy. The views I express in this testimony are my own and should not be construed as representing the official position of the Foundation for American Innovation or any other organization with whom I have a current or prior affiliation. In July 2019, during his first term, President Trump successfully persuaded the Dutch government to block sales of extreme ultraviolet lithography machines to Chinese semiconductor companies. These machines are the result of a tremendous range of scientific breakthroughs and technological miracles, employing lasers, for example, whose precision is akin to hitting a hole-in-one on the moon from Earth to paint sub-microscopic electrical circuits with light onto razor-thin wafers made of processed sand. At the time, these lithography machines, made exclusively by the Dutch company ASML, were not widely known outside of the semiconductor industry and its close observers. But President Trump's decision would prove wise and forward-looking. Within a few short years, ASML and their lithography technology became known the world over as key inputs in the manufacturing of advanced semiconductors. Today, it is widely believed that these controls represent the single most important technological choke point preventing China from manufacturing leading-edge semiconductors. Of course, since 2022, the United States has also imposed export controls on the advanced semiconductors themselves most relevant to AI. The wisdom and prudence of these controls has been the subject of vigorous debate in recent months, but that is not my focus today. Instead, I want to focus on the issue President Trump identified in 2019, semiconductor manufacturing equipment. And the reality I wish to convey to you is stark. There are large gaps in current semiconductor manufacturing export controls today, and these gaps have meaningfully enabled China's rapid progress in advanced semiconductor manufacturing in recent years. We have set on the path of denying China access to the most sophisticated machines in the world, advanced AI compute. But we have failed to deny access to something perhaps even more important, the machines that make the machines. It should be no surprise, then, that China has managed to significantly advance its semiconductor manufacturing industry considerably, even in light of our export controls. I want to emphasize that the U.S. has constructed a sound export control regime for semiconductor manufacturing equipment made by domestic companies. Our major shortcoming instead is that we have struggled to harmonize those controls with allies whose local companies compete with our own and who sometimes hold near monopolies over the production of certain equipment. This lack of international harmonization can result in insufficient controls on equipment that is short of the cutting edge but still advanced. Perhaps the best example of this is deep ultraviolet immersion lithography machines, the predecessor to extreme ultraviolet lithography. Like EUV machines, these are made almost exclusively by the Dutch company ASML. These machines can be used to manufacture both legacy chips, such as those at the 28 nanometer node, and near cutting-edge chips that fall within U.S. export controls, such as those on the 7 nanometer node. Our lack of international harmonization on export controls creates additional problems as well. In many cases, for example, U.S. firms are tightly export controlled even when their foreign competitors are not. American companies like Applied Materials, Lam Research, and KLA make complex tools for etching, deposition, cleaning, and metrology, all important parts of the semiconductor manufacturing process. Export of these tools to Chinese firms is largely forbidden by U.S. export controls. Yet the export of tools that are functionally the same from companies like Tokyo Electron, a Japanese company, is permitted. Unsurprisingly, the result is that the China sales of foreign competitors have jumped after U.S. export controls, suggesting that American firms are being denied revenue while critical technology flows into China nonetheless. This is the worst of both worlds. Our firms bear the cost of the policy, but the policy itself fails because our allies do not coordinate with us. Two policy tools are at our disposal. One is diplomacy. Diplomatic efforts have been ongoing since the 2022 imposition of export controls during the Biden administration and continue today under the Trump administration. If these efforts do not succeed, it is essential that policymakers employ the second tool, the foreign direct product rule. This allows the U.S. to impose export controls on foreign-made goods if they contain or are directly made with U.S. technology. Both options should be on the table, with an aim toward resolving as many of these gaps as is feasible in the near term. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. Mr. McGuire, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairman Huizenga, Ranking Member Kamlager-Dove. My name is Chris McGuire, and I am the Senior Fellow for China and Emerging Technologies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Over the last 5 years, I've worked in the National Security Council and the State Department in both the Trump and Biden administrations to develop U.S. technology protection and export control policies, particularly those related to semiconductors. My full written testimony has been submitted for the record, and I'll summarize the 5 key points here. Number 1, strong export controls on SME and components are critical to preserving U.S. technological leadership over China. SME is by far the most important input for making advanced chips, which are essential to AI and other emerging technologies and to nearly every cutting-edge military capability. SME is also an ideal target for strong export controls. It is a highly concentrated industry that the United States and our closest allies dominate, and advanced SME tools are literally the most complex machines that humans have ever made. SME has so far proven uniquely hard for China to indigenize, as its SME industry is 20 years behind leading-edge firms, but it could advance quickly without further action. Strong controls on SME and its subcomponents, which seek to constrain China's ability to manufacture advanced chips or build advanced tools, are the foundation of all U.S. technology protection efforts. If we lose our edge in advanced chip manufacturing, America's ability to curtail China's technological ambitions, shape the global landscape, and preserve our military advantages over China will rapidly evaporate. We cannot afford to get this wrong. Number 2, current controls are working, but not well enough. U.S. and allied restrictions have slowed China's progress in advanced chip making, which are currently 3 generations behind the leading edge and are capacity constrained. The best U.S. AI chips are currently 5 times as good as the best Chinese AI chips, and by 2027, Huawei's public roadmap suggests that the best U.S. AI chips will be 25 times better than Huawei's best chips. This is because China's manufacturing capabilities are not advancing as rapidly. However, gaps, loopholes, and inconsistent implementation of these policies are allowing Beijing to maintain, build, and expand strategically significant semiconductor capacity. The United States, the Netherlands, and Japan exported over $40 billion worth of SME to China in 2024. SME was the number 1 or number 2 export to China from each country. China is using this equipment to A, increase the quantity of advanced chips it can produce, and B, build out a massive number of mature node fabrication facilities that would enable it to dominate the global mature chip market just as it currently dominates rare earths. We must close these loopholes. Number 3, allied controls must be leveled up to match U.S. controls. Key partner countries, particularly the Netherlands and Japan, have not fully matched U.S. controls on SME. In particular, these countries continue to export tools and components to the most advanced Chinese fabs and Chinese tool makers, and they perform on-site maintenance support at advanced Chinese fabs, which U.S. companies are all prohibited from doing. Insufficient allied controls have uplifted Chinese chip-making capabilities while also shifting market share away from U.S. firms. Without this support from allied companies, the capabilities of advanced Chinese fabs and tool makers would stall and potentially even degrade. Number 4, expanded countrywide restrictions on SME, in addition to comprehensive restrictions on all advanced Chinese fabs and tool makers, are necessary to close all loopholes. Only broad, countrywide restrictions on all SME capable of advanced production can reliably prevent Beijing from advancing its chip-making capabilities or dominating mature node manufacturing. The United States should ban exports to China of all tools that can be used for advanced production, specifically all tools capable of 300mm wafer processing. This would halt the growth of China's advanced and mature node chip production capabilities. The Department of Commerce must also update the entity list to include all entities affiliated with China's national champions in chipmaking and SME, but entity-based measures alone cannot keep pace with China's rapid build-out and complex corporate structures. Point number 5. U.S. extraterritorial controls have proven effective and should be expanded to close gaps between U.S. and allied controls. The United States already applies extraterritorial controls on all but 33 close allies, which it currently exempts from these controls. These controls have proven effective and would be nearly impossible for any company to design around given the ubiquity of U.S. technology in the semiconductor supply chain. Suspending all exemptions from these controls until a country adopts fully matching restrictions would seal some of the most significant gaps in the SME control regime. Thank you again for calling this hearing and for inviting me to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. Mr. Wolf, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
To know about loopholes, you have to decide what you mean by the term. I mean, the general meaning of the term is that it's an ambiguity that the regulator missed when writing the rule. The other meaning of the term is that there's a gap in the rules that the person talking about it simply doesn't like. But to know whether a loophole exists, you have to know what the policy objective is. And there's some limitations in that. With respect to this area, because the moment you start imposing rules, you have to then ask, are they going to be both effective and not counterproductive? By effective, it means it actually stops the item that you're talking about going to the bad end user that you're referring to, and not counterproductive means you don't end up doing more harm to U.S. industry, thus harming U.S. domestic national security to the advantage of their foreign competitors in allied countries. The issue with export controls is that it was created, and the Allies enforce it, to achieve the objective of identifying the types of items that have some relationship to weapons of mass destruction, conventional weapons, or the parts or components or technology used to make them. And many of the gaps that are being referred to are a function of the limitation of the Allies taking that classical approach toward export controls. That is, they will only want to regulate items unless they have some direct relationship to weapons. The Biden administration took a much broader approach toward national security with respect to its effort to use a variety of list-based and end-use and end-user controls to cut off the types of items that are necessary for the development or production in China of advanced node semiconductors, production equipment, the compute for AI, and supercomputers. We haven't yet heard the Trump administration's policy objective with respect to how to accomplish something similar. The issue when dealing with the allies is how do you convince them to see that broader national security objective? How do you convince them to look in the way the Biden and the Trump administration have viewed national security with respect to China beyond that classical perspective? The Biden administration was quite successful in coming to agreement with the Dutch and Japanese with respect to a limited series of tools, as was described, but the Dutch and the Japanese and no other country has agreed to the expansive controls on activities by their companies or certain uncontrolled items for end uses, such as helping Chinese companies produce advanced node semiconductors. So how do we close that gap? Well, I've listed out a bunch of options. One, diplomacy. Two, carrots with threats, sticks with threats. And then in the meantime, also changing licensing policy until any of those objectives can be achieved so as not to disadvantage U.S. industry, domestic economic security to the direct advantage of their foreign competitors in allied countries with respect to equipment that is widely available. And I look forward to getting into a discussion of the pros and cons of each of these options with you. So I'll stop there and look forward to discussing any of the questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf, and I appreciate your deep knowledge on all of these things. And interestingly enough, my predecessor was the ambassador to the Netherlands at the time of 2019. I worked for him for 6 years as his district director. I'm the former chair of the Friends of the Netherlands Caucus, Dutch Caucus, and was quite aware of what was happening there with the discussions of Huawei and the inroads that Huawei had made and the demands that Huawei was making. My predecessor, Mr. Hoekstra, is now the ambassador to Canada, where he's dealing with a few other issues. I'm going to get to my questioning here. One issue that we have is that our allies have much weaker export controls than we do. As I think all of you have pointed out, the result is that when American companies are restricted from from selling to China. Sometimes those Dutch or Japanese companies backfill that lost sale. And to address that, I recently introduced H.R. 6058, the STRIDE Act, to improve export control coordination among allies and to stop those free passes. Mr. Ball, how important are chip-making tools? I mean, you touched on it. I want to just give you another crack at this. But how important are those chip-making tools to the U.S.-China AI competition?
I think those tools are foundational. It is the very clear objective of the Chinese government to not just catch up, but surpass the West in terms of advanced node semiconductor manufacturing. And in addition to that, I would also highlight the legacy node issue as well as being of critical importance. The reason for this is, in fact, really one of the key impetus for the CHIPS Act was the imposition, was the supply chain crunch that we had during COVID. Automobiles, consumer appliances, industrial equipment, things like this, shortages of semiconductors. Those were shortages of legacy node semiconductors. These are critical inputs to any advanced economy, and you can shut down any advanced economy if you control those inputs. They're low margin goods. The economics become very similar in some ways to rare earths and critical minerals. And so you could see that choke point being a critical leverage point. So I'd say both legacy and advanced semiconductor manufacturing is essential.
All right, I've got a couple of areas I need to move quickly through, but Mr. McGuire, in what ways are allied countries backfilling for these U.S. companies? And does legislation like STRIVE or others help to address that?
I would note four things. Number one, at advanced Chinese fabs, they can still export non-advanced tools, which allow them to build out their capacity. Number two, allied companies can still service tools at advanced Chinese fabs and can also service advanced tools anywhere in China, which allow them to maintain the tools. Number three, the allies can exempt components to Chinese tool makers. And then number four, there are certain advanced allied tools, the DUV machines in particular, that can still be exported to China. We urgently need to close these gaps, and I think legislation would be very helpful.
Okay. Some argue that because Beijing controls the supply of rare earth magnets, something that's big in Michigan with our automotive industry, the United States cannot protect its technology from Chinese exploitation. However, I believe that we are stronger than we think, but I worry that backing down teaches China to abuse any perceived leverage that they may have, whether it's from tariffs, fentanyl, to Taiwan. There's an old Leninist adage, you probe with bayonets. If you find mush, you push. If you find steel, you withdraw. And it seems that the CCP follows that quite closely. Mr. McGuire, what should the U.S. do to deter Beijing from weaponizing its rare earth supply so that we can make sovereign policy decisions without retaliation?
Absolutely.
And is it possible to even do that?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I think it's important to note how much more expansive the Chinese rare earth controls were than anything that the U.S. has on the books. I think that something that the U.S. could do if the Chinese go back to the well of rare earths and start to deny licenses is basically to impose an equivalent regime on semiconductors. So what that would mean would saying if you require a Chinese license to make any advanced chip, then it's only logical to have any export of any advanced chip to China, meaning any 14 nanometer or more advanced chip, require a U.S. export license. We're not saying we're necessarily going to deny all those licenses, but if the Chinese are going to require a license, then we have to require a license too. That would put extremely onerous restrictions on China and effectively make their entire technology industry go through the bottleneck that is BIS. I think it would be very painful for them, and it could cause them to pull back on their controls.
And it seems to me that that's why it's critically important, some of these agreements that we've had, newer agreements on rare earths with some other countries recently. So, all right, I've only got 30 seconds here, but while U.S. allies do have controls on some chip-making equipment, exports to China, the export of essential subcomponents make chip-making equipment like electrostatic chucks and advanced optics is largely unrestricted. Mr. Ball, if the U.S. and allies have enacted export controls to restrict China's access for producing chips, does it make sense that China continue to be allowed unrestricted sales of subcomponents into China? And Mr. Wolf, some PRC chip-making equipment companies have already been added to the Commerce blacklist known as the Entity List. Do other currently unlisted PRC chip-making equipment companies also conduct the same activities as those already blacklisted by Commerce? If so, which ones? My time has expired. I may need to hold that, and certainly I would like to get that in writing, and possibly if we have a second round, I'd like to revisit that. So with that, I will recognize the ranking member for her question period.
Thank you so much. You said the entity, and it made me think of Mission Impossible. So, Mr. McGuire, what would you say are some of the potential security concerns with offshoring our most sensitive AI technologies to a country, say, like Saudi Arabia?
So I think you have some physical and cybersecurity concerns that obviously these are kind of very difficult environments to operate in, so you want to make sure that the chips are physically secure, also that the models are secure in the locations, and you also want to make sure that the compute that's in those locations is not being used to help our adversaries or otherwise undermine U.S. national security.
Thank you. That was succinct and illuminating. I agree. I think it's important. And I actually would hope, Mr. Chair, that on behalf of the subcommittee, you could request a classified briefing kind of on this agreement that just happened so that we get some more visibility and daylight into it and can maybe bring back other folks to help us understand all of the things that may or may not be in the agreement that just happened.
If you don't mind, there are discussions on some classified briefings for a number of issues, but that would be one of them.
See, that's why you're a great chair. So, Mr. Wolf, I think that you can undermine the effectiveness of export controls when you make export controls negotiable. What do you think about that?
I agree. I'm a purist. If something warrants control because of national security concerns, it might go to bad end use, or bad destination. It should be controlled. If not, then not. And the moment you start negotiating on that, you compromise that national security objective. That's been the rule forever. Things are different now, with, as in the previous set of questions, with the leverage China has with respect to the rare earth topic, changing that fundamental calculus. And it's extremely complex, other than developing supply chain autonomy, as CFR came out the other day in terms of supply chain security issues, particularly on rare earths. We're sort of short right now for good ideas to address that. But fundamentally, what you say is absolutely correct.
Right. And even though things may be different now, what should never be different is that national security, our national security, should never be negotiable.
Yes.
So and it should not also ever be for sale. So, Mr. McGuire, does charging a 15% fee do anything to address the national concerns of selling an advanced AI chip like the H20 to China?
With the caveat that I would defer to counsel on the legality of those provisions, no, I don't think it does.
Okay. Well, so I think we have an administration that when they want something, they get it done. I'm going to just say that because they've wanted to do a lot of things and they've been getting them done, right? So I think we should be thinking about that. And we should also be thinking about revenue schemes when it comes to things like these AR chips. So, Mr. McGuire, do you think that selling Blackwell chips to China would harm our national security?
Yes, I do. And I was very pleased that the president said that that was not the plan.
Right. But once again, not saying that there's not going to be a plan, and then, for example, having a big glossy dinner like what we saw last night, I think should raise concerns for any China hawk or person who's invested in our national security. And I just have to say, this room should actually be full of people. We should actually be in the larger hearing committee room because of the event that happened last night where you saw AI titans embracing the administration. And then we hear this deal, and while 35,000 Blackwell chips might not sound like over 100,000. It still should raise the ire enough for everyone to want to be in this committee asking questions about what happened, about what's in this agreement, about what's in this deal. I remember last year, former chair, when we had the Secretary of State in our hearing room asking questions to a room full of interested people, asking real probative questions about national security and what was at stake. And I think that agreement that was made yesterday, I think that dinner that happened yesterday should have everyone's eyes wide open about the 5-alarm fire that we could potentially be grappling with the revenue schemes and the profit-selling questionable schemes of these chips. Mr. McGuire, you said yourself that SME is the most advanced technology on the planet, and we should be asking these kinds of questions every single time we get. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for indulging me for those extra seconds, and I yield back.
The chair wasn't paying attention, but sure, yes. Yeah.
Thank you anyway.
You are very welcome. And you acknowledged our chair emeritus, or emerita.
Well,
Sorry, my
Tuss is male and Ty
emeritus.
Ty
Yes.
is female.
Yes. So
I took Latin.
Yeah, so my Latin,
Two genders.
my Latin was a little weak, but while we appreciate his attendance, my understanding is with committee rules was you go through our subcommittee members first, and then.
See, that's what happens when you're not a chairman anymore. Yeah, watch the door. It's in the back.
But your attendance is appreciated because of your attention to this issue over the last.
I will
couple
have
of
to
years.
return at a later time then.
Okay.
Gonna move
Well,
back.
Yep.
and unless our colleagues are willing to yield, that's all right. Gentlemen yield. So with
Well,
that, we
thank
will.
you. That's very gracious.
We welcome the chair emeritus to the committee and recognize him for 5 minutes.
Well, I thank the chair for your generosity. This is an issue I think it is so important, and I worked on this when I was a young federal prosecutor at Department of Justice in 1996. Prosecuted the campaign finance violations from China. Johnny Chiang led us to the director of Chinese intelligence, China Aerospace, putting money into his Hong Kong bank account to influence the presidential election. And why? Because they wanted dual-use satellite technology. They wanted to be a member of the WTO. They wanted China Aerospace to be the beneficiary of our technologies. And since that time, they have come a very, very long ways. I introduced the Chips for America Act at the behest of Secretary Pompeo and Secretary Wilbur Ross in the first Trump administration to pull the manufacturing out of Taiwan, where 90% of the advanced production is made, into the United States. So we can truly make America first in manufacturing of semiconductor chips. They got politicized, unfortunately, but it's working. DeepSeek is disturbing to me because we sold it to them. NVIDIA, God bless them, and it was legal in their defense at the time, sold the advanced chips that allowed China to make the first AI DeepSeek technology, which is now banned and would be illegal under current law. But the damage is done. Now they're creating all these AI chips. In fact, in open AI, I was told yesterday that China is actually ahead of the United States. So in this great power competition, we have a lot of work to do. I want to bring up just a couple. First of all, Mr. Ball, your point on the foreign direct product rule is spot on. Japan and Netherlands entered into an agreement with the administration, but the problem is a lot of that technology is already out the door to China. And I do believe, Mr. Chairman, that invoking this foreign direct product rule would be very appropriate, in this case. My questions are, they can get around this real easy. The entities list, you had Shanghai, Byron, on the entities list, advanced AI chips. It was banned from the sale to China. Then they changed their name to Shanghai Byron Semiconductor Technology, and they get around it. So I'm working on legislation that would basically set a statutory standard that would ban any affiliate that's 50% or more owned by a blocked entity. Do you believe that would be helpful? And that would be at BIS and the Commerce Department, over which we have jurisdiction. Do you think that would be a helpful step, Mr. Ball?
I haven't examined that closely enough to give a good answer here, but what I will say is that I think the foreign direct product rule is worth considering codifying in legislation.
Yep.
And I would also say that country controls are likely more appropriate than entity controls for a lot of these technologies for the exact corporate pliability reasons that you mentioned.
So there's been a debate at BIS about sector versus entities list, individual, and then sanctions. And my problem is if you ban a specific company, they can change the name of that company overnight, and you're off the entities list. Mr. McGuire.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we need to do both. I mean, certainly on the most advanced Chinese fabs, we certainly should make sure that they are blocked from all U.S. allied tools and completely blacklisted. The fact that allies can backfill is problematic. But I think you're completely right that the only controls that really we know will work, and given the importance of this, it is really important that we apply controls that we know work. And thank you for your leadership on this issue over the years. I think it mandates that we have expanded countrywide controls to make sure that we get everything that is actually going to help the Chinese with advanced production. And the best way to do that from a definitions perspective, as the China Committee, I think, highlighted in their report, is to just do all 300 millimeter tools, all tools capable of 300 millimeter wafers, which would, there's no way that you could make advanced chips with any wafer, any 200
That's a great point. So, my view is like they steal it to a very large scale, and we get that in our classified briefings, but we don't have to sell it to them. I think I'm worried on the advanced chip level. We've already, the horse is out of the barn. The damage is done. They're building a very high level legacy capacity of chips to counter our advance. But I think to the chairman's point, we're getting now into the manufacturing process. I see no reason, first of all, that we should be selling AI military grade technology chips to China, number one. And then number two, any manufacturing tools that could be used to make AI military grade technology. Just quick response.
Completely agree. I think we should really block the Chinese comprehensively from being able to buy, make, or rent access to U.S. AI chips, and Congress should definitely help across the board on all three of those.
That gentleman's time has expired. With that, the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Johnson, is recognized for 5 minutes.
We're just doing a Texas two-step at the moment. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you all for being here today. Across the nation, our inventions and innovations provide a competitive edge that our adversaries wish they had. I know this well because my district is home to Texas Instruments headquarters, one of the top semiconductor companies in the world, and Qorvo, which produces parts for the F-35s and other key defense applications, and many more. We can't let our adversaries take advantage of our clients and our talents. As this committee has highlighted throughout the year, export controls enforcement is a priority. The current administration claims to agree, but under Trump, the Bureau of Industry and Security has shown a breakdown in process and complete absence of vision, and it is losing talent to a devastating degree. Mr. Wolf, given your extensive experience in BIS, what can you tell us about the reasons for such an extensive personnel turnover?
I think they're consistent with the other 300,000 or so federal employees who are not here now that were before, and BIS is not unaffected by any of that. I would ask that this committee do whatever it can to help the staff there to work with the Bureau to find ways to hire subject matter experts in AI and semiconductors and chip making tools and biotechnology, because in order for there to be thoughtful policy in these really complex areas, they need a lot more subject matter experts and bipartisan support. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and it's not only just the technology experts, it's also experts on Russia, China, Iran.
Absolutely. Mandarin speakers, people with Intel experience, people who can support the enforcement efforts. Secretary Raimondo had a great line about wanting to make BIS the the sexiest, most exciting place in government to work, and I fully am in support of that mission, and I ask all of you to help try to sponsor that, to work with BIS, to encourage people from Silicon Valley and others to want to work for the government to support the mission that you all are describing quite well.
Right, yeah. I'm very concerned about the talent drain because we can have all the policies in the world, but if we don't have the talent that's smart enough to figure out how to enforce them and how to enact them, then we're not going to get very far.
Absolutely.
And I do think it's incumbent upon this committee to insist to the administration that they reverse some of their practices and, try to rebuild the strength of our workforce to the highest capacity possible. I want to turn to just a slightly different topic. We know that our adversaries are working overtime to obtain United States defense articles, services, and related data from military encryption and communication systems to missiles and satellites. We also know that our export control regime is in place to thwart these bad actors, but violations remain a persistent challenge. Does the State Department's use of outside monitors, also known as special compliance officers, enhance companies' compliance with export controls rather than the threat of large dollar penalties? What is your take on that?
Well, I am a special compliance officer and an outside monitor, so strong views about that. And absolutely, with someone from the outside with expertise in the area, with independence who reports directly to the State Department, it can result in a lot more attention by the company on a day-to-day basis of creating the systems and procedures and hiring the experts and other personnel to do all the things that you're describing. And I think that that has a much better impact on a company doing the hard work that needs to be done than just simply a large dollar penalty or the threat of it.
Yeah, and on another note, in previous hearings that we've had, we've talked about the need for increased whistleblower protections and key TAM protections in this area to ensure that we are notified of bad actors and when the export controls are violated. Can any of you all speak to the importance of strengthening those protections?
I know the area is working well in government contracts and other parts of law. I've never actually seen it applied in export controls or where it would have not resulted in a disclosure of some sort, but I'm happy to work with you to take the benefits of government contracts and apply it to export controls.
Yeah, in previous panels, other experts have testified as to the urgency for this because, again, we can have policies and we can have out there, but if we don't have enforcement mechanisms and if we don't have protections for those who are in the deep parts of the world to be able to report violations and protections for those reporters, those whistleblowers, then again, we're going to miss a lot of the battle. And based on these, I just want to share with the committee, I have a bill on this issue, and I would love to have everyone here sign on that and have it be a joint effort from this committee to strengthen the whistleblower protections on export controls. And with that, I yield back.
Oh, we'd love to review that legislation. So with that, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, gentlemen, everybody, for being here. I just got to spend a couple moments editorializing. I feel like I have to. When we talk about some of the things that force America to do what it has to do, when we talk about rare earth minerals and the components that go into some of this machinery and the products we need to make, we need to quit calling them rare earth because they're not rare. They are critical. But America, because of our policies, have said we can't get them, either here in our country or elsewhere. And that is hobbling us all for the sake of, I don't know, the Endangered Species Act or climate change. Like, if we want to save the country, we had to better understand that we're causing some of the problems ourselves. And while we can complain about the Trump administration dealing with what is, we can also talk about the fact that we got a bunch of bureaucrats, particularly in State Department, that have been there through administration after administration who pick our allies over America. And we've got to work with that. And we can't get rid of these people, even when they're not for America. And things like the foreign direct product rule, which was supposed to be our Silicon sword, it has not been effective because we have, in the last administration, we've carved out loopholes for Japan and the Netherlands. Am I right, Mr. Wolf? We've carved them out, right? And the machinery has gone directly to Beijing, and nobody said a damn thing about it, right?
Well, the hope was that the allies would impose their own controls.
The hope is not a course of action. That's like we're in a fight for the future, not only of our country, but for the free world, and we're basing it on hope? Like, that's ridiculous. I'm sorry. It's just, that's absurd. Like, I'm around serious people, and this is a serious issue, so we ought to be doing serious things as opposed to hoping that they're going to align with us at some point in time, harmonize with us. We're going to either have to force this to happen, or it's not going to happen, because people seek their best economic benefit and outcome. That's what we all do. And these people want to make money, and God bless them, I understand, and there's a huge market in China, and they want to sell to it because they make a lot of money. Somebody has to care for America's sovereignty and security, and the sovereignty and security of civilization. That has to be the serious people, so we have to do something about it. Let me ask you just a couple other questions. Mr. Wolf, look, I like your purist attitude. You are an expert on the export administration regulations and ITAR. I don't know if that's given us a chance. Have you had a chance to scrutinize how the blacklist works and doesn't work in terms of those two things? And then I'm wondering if you think, and I think this goes directly to what you love, the Bureau of Industry and Security in the Department of Commerce only has two, as I understand it, two export enforcement officers for the whole of China. Is that two?
Yes, sir, correct.
Two.
6 in the world.
I don't know. That seems lacking. Am I missing? Is the portfolio pretty small? So
no, which is why historically export controls have been most effective when we convince other countries that are producer nations to impose their own controls and use their enforcement authorities overseas to achieve a common security objective, and that's been the tradition. And the difficulty with the entity list rule that you just mentioned is that no other country has an entity list rule. No other country imposes sanctions against individual companies. And so when the U.S. imposes an entity list action, which is quite deserved and warranted, and I used to run the program, and I'm glad that it's active, it has very limited effect after a short period of time, because by definition it only applies to non-sensitive, widely available commercial items, which means that all a company has to do is shift away from the U.S. origin item to the foreign origin item, then the entity list rule has no longer any effect.
Okay, so we got to find a way to solve that problem, because it's with the best of intentions, but it requires cooperation and collaboration with other countries and other companies and folks, and they just don't simply have the same impetus, motivation that we do or should have. So in that vein, should chip makers be required to export only through certified logistics providers, for instance, making exports easier to track? I know it's painful. I'm a capitalist. I don't like the regulations, but this is important stuff, and we have to be able to control it.
Well, on this issue, the diversion risk is less the topic on tools. It's to get other allies to impose their own controls, or in the meantime, not harm U.S. industry by licensing policies that are more restrictive than their foreign competitors.
And one last question.
Yeah.
Should we require ping-enabled base location verification for this stuff, so at least we know where it is, and does that help us at all, or is that?
That creates significant security issues with respect to backdoors and access and the ability to track chips in a way, or hack chips that we might not like. There are other solutions that aren't on-chip governance that might work in terms of the package for diversion risk issues, but probably not with respect to on the chip itself.
I yield.
Gentleman's time has expired. I will note that the House proposed an increase in those BIS inspectors. Indications are that the Senate is lowering that number, so we may want to try to address that as well. With that, seeing no additional Democrat colleagues here right now, we will go to the delegate from Guam, Mr. Moylan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and ranking members and our distinguished witnesses. Today, we're confronting one of the more recent security issues of our time: whether the U.S. can maintain AI dominance over the People's Republic of China. And that boils down to one question: who controls the full AI ecosystem? Not just the chips, but every tool, input, and subcomponent that enables artificial intelligence. So we must look at the facts and ask, why was China able to develop AI models that rival our own even after we restricted the access to our most advanced chips? The simple answer is because China advanced using the parts of the ecosystem we failed to regulate. Without allied coordination, China will always find a way around this. This is why our strategy cannot be piecemeal, reactive, or target just the most obvious components of AI technology. It must be ecosystem-wide and coordinated with our allies. This is precisely what my legislation, the China AI Power Report Act, seeks to do, and I will introduce this bipartisan legislation tomorrow. Under this legislation, the Department of Commerce will require to conduct a comprehensive annual assessment of China's entire AI ecosystem. This includes everything from chip design to fabrication tools to AI model development. Most critically, it will pinpoint the loopholes in our current export controls. This issue is important to me. China's AI gains are gains for its military, and nowhere are the stakes of this national security challenge more evident than in the Indo-Pacific, and nowhere more directly than in Guam, the district I represent. So closing the loopholes is essential for our security, for Guam and across the nation. So Mr. Ball, question for you, sir. Are hardware controls alone insufficient? And will we need to look more closely on China's computer capacity and its ability to use cloud system for non-civilian end-use activities?
Thank you, sir. I think that is very much an issue worth examining. Remote access is an area, not just for consumer and enterprise technologies, but also certainly military. And so I think that is very much something that we need to examine very closely, and I'd be happy to give you more thoughts after this hearing.
I appreciate that. We will. Mr. Wolf, should export controls put in place a maximum computer capacity for Chinese-based end users? And is it possible to regulate it in that way?
Well, that already is largely the effect of the embargo with respect to high-end GPUs and other items to China. So that does exist already, and so far the Trump administration hasn't changed that rule.
Okay, and one more for you, sir. Does BIS or any other federal agency currently know the amount of computer capacity China uses from data centers outside China that rely on U.S. chips?
I don't know if anybody knows the answer. I don't know the answer to that question.
How can we find out?
The intelligence service agencies and BIS to dive into it as a special project. I don't know if anybody has studied that.
There are no restrictions on China's access to U.S. cloud services now. So actually, theoretically, the amount of computing power that Chinese companies have access to is unlimited. I agree that's a problem.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you to our witnesses, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. With that, we will go to Mr. Kane from New Jersey for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to our distinguished witnesses for being here today. China is notorious for its ongoing efforts to obtain illegal access to American innovation. Its efforts to steal America's innovative technologies and gain a foothold in the AI race must be thwarted. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about how we can address numerous loopholes in our export control regime, shoring up America's technological edge. Mr. Wolf, the information technology system at the BIS need critical security updates to effectively block adversaries from exploiting critical U.S. technology. Congressman Crow and I introduced the BIS IT Modernization Act to keep American technology out of the hands of foreign adversaries. Can you share how secure IT systems at the BIS are critical to keeping American technology out of the hands of our enemies?
No, thank you for that, Bill. I think I actually cite it as something positive that should be done. The IT system is ancient and needs to be improved. It's critical that the agencies be able to share information in a secure system, work with classified information directly, be able to task the intelligence community for information, protect data that's filed by companies as part of applications, and for analysts to be able to do what they do without fear of exfiltration. So please pursue those IT modernization efforts on a bipartisan basis with all you can.
Thank you. Mr. Ball, export controls are critical to our national security. The Center for Strategic and International Studies has claimed, in terms of return on investment, an increase in BIS's budget is likely to be one of the best opportunities available anywhere in U.S. national security. The President also recognized the importance of BIS, requesting a funding increase in his budget request for this important agency. Do you agree that increasing the budget for the Bureau of Industry and Security is a critical decision that should be prioritized this fiscal year?
Yes, sir, I absolutely do.
Thank you. Mr. McGuire, China has a long history of smuggling U.S. technology to evade export controls. A recent report from the Center for New American Security indicates that China has been evading U.S. export control regime to smuggle somewhere from 10,000 to several hundred thousand AI chips into China in 2024 alone. Could you please share how a whistleblower protection program could strengthen the work of the Bureau of Industry and Security officials in enforcing America's export controls?
Sure. I mean, I think that BIS absolutely needs to be able to partner with industry to highlight where there is circumventions or violations of controls. That's very important, and to the degree that there are people that are in industry that are see malfeasance and are willing to call it out, we should absolutely welcome that, because those people are patriots that are really trying to help the U.S. government. The other thing I'd say, though, is that the fact that the U.S. government actually has no license requirements on the vast majority of the countries in the world for these chip shipments is actually mostly why that diversion is occurring. Look at Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, Singapore. The U.S. government doesn't have to be notified about chip shipments to these countries. So when you're talking about where's the diversion coming from, it's very likely from these. And if we had some ability to track the shipments from the start, it would certainly make it a lot easier for us to find out if they were going to China.
Thank you. And then to all of the witnesses in the little over minute remaining, there's no doubt that significant loopholes remain in America's current export control framework. Could each of you share what elements you believe should be prioritized in strengthening our export control framework?
Just one follow-on comment to the budget, both for enforcement, which is where a lot of the attention has been, which is critical, of course, but also for export administration, where I come from. The analysts, the licensing officers, the people that support export enforcement need the same degree of help, same degree of budget support, same degree of recruitment efforts to do the analysis and support enforcement and efficient licensing. So I just want to add that extra point.
No, thank you for adding that. Anybody else on anything else we need to be looking at?
I'd say three things. Number one, countrywide controls on China on an expanded set of tools with the foreign produce direct product rule, as has been discussed, to prevent them from making the chips. Number two, a global license requirement that, or at least on an expanded set of countries that allows us to make sure that they're not diverting the chips into China. And then number three, remote access restrictions that prevent Chinese companies from training on U.S. cloud and give limitations on what they can access remotely.
Thank you.
I would just emphasize remote access restrictions as well.
Thank you. Thank you to our panel. Yield back to the chair.
Gentleman yields back. With that, gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Shreve, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McGuire, under current law, BIS maintains the Commerce Control List and Entity List, and companies like Huawei and SMIC are already on that list because they support China's military buildup and the surveillance state. But here's a hole, and this is in agreement with and in furtherance of the points that our Chairman Emerita made a bit earlier. BIS can only list the foreign persons, not U.S. incorporated subsidiaries and those same adversarial companies who own or control. So a Huawei or a SMIC subsidiary sitting on our soil can legally acquire sensitive technologies and funnel them right back to China. So my question, would expanding BIS's authority to add those U.S.-based subsidiaries to the entity list help prevent sensitive technology to being routed to strategic adversaries like China? And I heard at one point in testimony that 50% ownership threshold. And in your view, is that sufficient?
So thank you for raising this. I think this is actually a very important point, a very important loophole that has largely gone unaddressed. The fact that Chinese companies take AI chips, the only place in the world that Chinese headquartered companies, a subsidiary of a Chinese headquartered company, is allowed to buy a U.S. chip under U.S. law is in the United States of America. And that's legal. That's silly. Right? Like, that should absolutely be restricted. The reason it's not is because export control authorities can't govern, as you noted, sales inside the United States. Now, there are other ways that BIS might be able to resolve this, specifically with ICTS authorities that restrict transactions inside the United States, so you might not need to use export controls. That said, one way or another, covering this gap and also having Congress codify the authority to cover this gap, whether it be for Huawei SMIC or kind of any entity that is covered by export controls or other sanctions inside the United States, is a critical part of our regime that we absolutely need to cover.
Just to follow up on that, yes, the other authority within BIS, the Information Communication Technology Supply Chain Authority, would be able to address the in-country activity you're referring to, and then to the extent that company or any other company wanted to send something back to their mothership, whether it's a toothbrush or semiconductor technology, would already be prohibited by existing controls. So the two have to work together to address your objective.
I appreciate that. Mr. Wolf, enforcement, of course, is critical, and that's what we're largely talking about today, but BIS officials wear a second hat. They're the ones charged with helping U.S. companies understand and comply with these rules, and they coordinate with partners who share our national security priorities, and coordinating with trusted partners to strengthen our security. But given the scope of that mission, and this is in furtherance to Mr. Perry's point, should Congress consider increasing BIS's resources so they can actually execute on those responsibilities? We know there are 2 export control officers, but if you agree with this line of question, which I think you do, can you add some color as to what materially that expansion of resources might look like so we could execute on that mission that BIS is charged with, which is twofold?
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to give you a longer list than what I included in my testimony, but on your first topic, education, outreach to ensure compliance and understanding is absolutely critical. As you saw from my attachment, these rules are insanely complicated, and in order to help companies comply and not inadvertently make mistakes, they need to understand them, and that is a core mission of BIS that should be supported. With respect to the overseas officers, you could add 100 more officers overseas to do end-use and end-user checks, but until you can get buy-in by foreign governments of a common security objective, you're never going to be as effective at adopting the goals that we're all just describing today. So really working with the allies is key, and as the chairman mentioned at the beginning and others, the impact of the rare earth issue is limiting the ability of the U.S. government to do some of that work right now, as evidenced by the pullback on the affiliates rule and some of the other activities that have occurred. So supply chain independence with respect to rare earths is critical. But in the meantime, don't do more harm than good with respect to what is in U.S. industry and applying policies that are more harsh for U.S. companies than they are for their foreign competitors, by definition handing the markets over to the foreign competitors. So it's a combination of each of those 3 different topics, big picture, but I'll give you a longer list later if you like.
All right. Mr. Chairman, my time's expired, but I appreciate these responses very much.
Your time has expired, yet, as they say on television, but there's more. With the indulgence of our witnesses, the ranking member and I would like to continue with a quick second round, and so if you wanted to stick around, you could maybe explore that a bit more. So if that's all right with our witnesses, all right. Great, appreciate that. I'm going to return to my kind of final question that I didn't really have time to get an answer on. We're talking about the chip-making equipment, and as a result that there's new Chinese chip-making equipment companies. These companies are experiencing double-digit and triple-digit revenue growth, particularly for sales of less advanced tools used to make foundational chips that serve as the backbone of the modern digital economy. So, Mr. Ball, if the U.S. and allies had enacted export controls to restrict China's access to tools for producing chips, does it make sense that we continue to allow unrestricted sales of subcomponents into China, particularly when these subcomponents are almost all made by either U.S. or allied companies?
No, sir, I don't think it does. Some subcomponents are generally applicable sort of industrial subcomponents that you export controls would have different implications, but there are also highly specialized subcomponents that go into lithography machines, metrology machines, many other things. And those subcomponents are their critical inputs and I think should be export controlled in coordination with allies.
Great, appreciate that. And Mr. Wolf, you had talked a little bit about the entity list. My question was, do other currently unlisted PRC chip-making equipment companies also conduct the same activities of those already blacklisted by Commerce? And if so, which ones, and how do we deal with that?
Yeah, in December of last year, the Biden administration added many, but not all, of the tool companies. They don't know the reasons for the differences, why some weren't listed. I think they should be. I agree completely with the need to work with the allies, because a lot of these parts and components are made in allied countries to cut off the supply for the same reasons. There's a sort of an evolving structure of a smaller group of close allies called the Wassenaar-1, which is a smaller group of producer nations outside of Russia.
Wassenaar, by the way, is where the U.S. Embassy is in,
there you go.
in the Netherlands.
Or Consensus-1, and that would be, I think, even consistent with Trump administration policies and worldviews, the organization to work through to try to accomplish on a multilateral basis controls on the chip-making components, and also sanctions by their countries against the remaining Chinese SME companies. Maybe somebody from, earlier could explain why some of the tool companies were listed, but not all. I don't know the difference.
Okay. In a recent report by the semiconductor industry research firm SemiAnalysis found that the biggest roadblock for Chinese production of advanced AI chips is the CCP's struggle to produce high bandwidth memory. Mr. McGuire, could you please explain what high bandwidth memory is and how it relates to this development, and could you walk through the key Chinese companies involved in AI chip production and how the U.S. and allied export controls impact those companies?
Sure. So high bandwidth memory is essentially very, very fast memory that is almost uniquely used in high-end AI chips that are needed for the training and operation of advanced models. With this kind of very sophisticated memory, it couples with the very sophisticated processor to create the capabilities of these kind of supercomputers in a chip. It is in very short supply. It is almost exclusively made in Korea by allied firms. China's trying to make it themselves. The key Chinese memory maker is CXMT. CXMT is not on the entity list. Now, they are probably covered by some U.S. controls due to some end-use regulations, but the fact is there is some lack of clarity here. We absolutely should make sure that CXMT is fully restricted from U.S. and allied tools. Also that YMTC, which has subsidiaries that make HBM, namely one called XMC, that should be restricted from U.S. and allied tools. We should have countrywide restrictions on any tools that are particularly necessary for high bandwidth memory production, of which there is a list of those tools that I know our colleagues in the government have too, that we could work with you on. Those should all be restricted countrywide. I completely agree that this is a really important choke point, and if we squeeze it, even if China can make a bunch of logic dies, they will struggle to make large numbers of AI chips because they will not be able to couple the die with the memory. That was the conclusion of the SemiAnalysis report, and I completely agree with it.
And what happens if the CCP is unable to get their equipment serviced by major American, Dutch, Japanese companies, and its tools break down over time without specialized servicing as well?
This is very important, particularly for lithography tools. So these tools, semiconductor manufacturing tools need constant maintenance. As we were saying, as all of us have noted, these are the most complex tools in the world. They constantly require little tweaking, or individual subcomponents fail, they need to be removed, have new ones put in. Particularly for the lithography tools, the really complicated ones, the ability to maintain and service these tools is itself extremely specialized. Only ASML can do it. Nobody can operate or run these tools without ASML. ASML provides on-site support to make sure that they keep operating. If ASML did not provide that on-site support, the tools would likely break down and degrade. China cannot provide that servicing themselves. They know it. And the United States has restricted U.S. companies from providing that on-site servicing at advanced Chinese fabs. The Dutch have not done that for ASML, or they have in very limited ways. This is a key gap that we need to close.
Yeah, I think that's ultimately one of those questions. How do we stop our U.S. allies from servicing that equipment that's already in China? So,
and I think there are ways that we can do this with extraterritorial U.S. controls. The Dutch might not like it, but there are ways that I outlined in my testimony that we can make this subject to U.S. jurisdiction and stop it ourselves.
looking forward to exploring that more. With that, the ranking member is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I too want to return back to my final comments, especially on the Saudi deal, because it is a serious issue. The administration greenlit 35,000 Blackwell chips to Saudi Arabia. Maybe not hundreds of thousands, but I think 35,000 is still significant. And Saudi Arabia is the same country of origin to 15 of the 19 terrorists who attacked the United States on 9/11. And I have to add that the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund backing the AI company receiving the chips is also in business with Jared Kushner's private equity fund for a $55 billion buyout of a gaming company. And this deal went through without Congress having any daylight into it, and because of that, one could postulate that it went through with regardless of any national security concerns. And I don't think that's a sentence anyone wants to ever have to say. And now we're asking, who does the deal benefit? And I think that is a serious issue, and one we shouldn't ignore. So, Mr. Wolf, you discussed loopholes in your testimony and in some of your subsequent comments. Can the administration right now or at any time unilaterally close these loopholes?
It's difficult. To the extent that a foreign company uses U.S. technology, software, or equipment to make what they make in whatever area, there is an ability to assert extraterritorial jurisdiction. The difficulty with that is that it is short-lived, in that companies then design out U.S. technology, U.S. equipment, and U.S. components, and then we have no longer the ability to assert our authority to stop a foreign company doing whatever you're describing.
It does sound like whack-a-mole, but it is a tool that can be used by the administration.
I'm not disagreeing. I'm only saying that it has limited durability.
Right. Absolutely. So short-term, long-term tools should be discovered, employed, tested, et cetera.
Correct.
And at the end of the day, this is an administration. Any administration has levers. The question is, how do you use them? How often? How do you change them to continue to make them effective?
Absolutely. That's why I list the various carrots, the various sticks, the appeals to common interests, the use of new plurilateral regimes, the leveling up U.S. licensing policy. In the meantime, it's a very complex issue, but you're hitting on all the right topics.
Yes, lots of carrots, lots of sticks. So I recently introduced the Bipartisan Export Controls Enforcement Act, which would increase the very small number of export control officers stationed overseas to conduct end-use checks of controlled items. So, Mr. Wolf, this one is also for you. Are 11 ECOs globally enough to monitor and check the billions of dollars of licensed commerce BIS approves?
Absolutely not. Again, we could add 100 ECOs, but it would still pale in comparison to getting the benefit of allies working with us. What we saw with, for example, the U.S. and 38 countries coming together in response to the Russia response, they've all imposed their own same controls together equally, and the ability to regulate and enforce that, even with all the weaknesses and the gaps and the diversions that are occurring, is far more extensive than if the U.S. had done that alone using its extraterritorial authority to try to enforce the same. So I sort of call for that same sort of ambition with respect to identifying with the allies a common threat with respect to Chinese issues, as in a much easier case, I admit, was the case in response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
So many of us have asked about the entity list. And under the Biden administration, there was an expansive export controls on the PRC and Russia, which went further than any previous administration. It built coalition with 38 other nations to impose crippling controls on Russia and Belarus, and impose unprecedented export controls to restrict the PRC from obtaining advanced computing chips, developing and maintaining supercomputers, and manufacturing advanced semiconductors. So I'm actually worried that our export controls are atrophying without regular entity list updates to capture evasion. Mr. Wolf, do you think that the list is being updated with enough regularity to capture evasion by Russia or Chinese bad actors?
It always requires constant revision for the points mentioned as new companies are created, there are diversion risks created, and the government is actually in a much better position to do that than industry trying to sleuth through records of who owns whom. And so this is where a resource topic should go. Who are the companies involved, whether they're affiliated or not, whether they're across the street or have a corporate relationship involved in the diversion? Massive amounts of resources are needed to keep companies on the list or add them to, or to remove them off once they're no longer a threat or involved in the bad activity. And there aren't enough resources to keep the list pruned and updated that you're referring to.
Great. Thank you again. Thank you to all of the witnesses, and thank you to the chair for hosting this hearing, because I think you see there's bipartisan concern and an interest to help rectify some of these challenges.
You're welcome. With that, gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate this second bite of the apple, and in the vein of bipartisanship, would just note that I'm happy to be on the act that the ranking member spoke of. It certainly has the support of many of us. If I could just dive a bit deeper into some of your testimony earlier, Mr. McGuire. You spoke about the foundational chips, and so much of our time has been focused on the PRC specifically, but closing these export control gaps is not just to be focused on China, but Chinese foundational chips are enabling both Russian, for example, and Iranian militaries, China's mass-scale microelectronics sales to the Russian defense industry has allowed President Putin to not only stay in the game in the Ukraine, but in material ways continue to prosecute that war far longer than many thought they would be able to back in 22. Chinese chips were found in the Iranian Shahed drones. Mr. McGuire, what does all this mean about the threats posed by the foundational or legacy semiconductors? And what should the U.S. do or be doing about China's ambition with these chips?
Yeah, thank you for raising this. I think that there's really two threats from the legacy chip questions. One is what you outlined, that these chips do still have military capabilities. We talk about advanced chips as having the kind of the ones that are most critical to national security, but many of the chips that are found in our many of our military systems, and then many of the ones that we're seeing abroad are actually these legacy foundational chips. So that's number one. Number two is the risk that actually China not only wants to have this capacity, but they actually want to dominate this capacity globally, which poses those strategic risks and also supply chain risks that are really significant. And this is because it takes a long time to build a fab. We can actually see this happening in slow motion, but everyone knows it's happening. Everyone knows that 60% of the legacy fabs that were built out in the entire world over the last 2 years were built in China. China's legacy chip capacity, I think, is going from with 34% in 2023, and 2027 it's going to go to 47%. Ours is at 4%. So they're trying to move. They're trying to not only kind of use this capacity to further their national security, but also dominate the market. And then once they do that, they will follow the same playbook that they have over and over. They will undercut U.S. firms, push other U.S. and allied firms out of the market, and then get that market share up to the 80-90%, at which point everyone is reliant on them. That is an unacceptable risk. I think there's a bipartisan agreement on that, and there hasn't been agreement on what to do about it. We could do all sorts of other things about how to prevent Chinese legacy chips from coming into the U.S. market, but if we want to constrain the growth, because we think that it is unacceptable for China to have such a large legacy chip industry, the only way to do that is with controls on semiconductor manufacturing equipment.
I appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, we just can't afford a system where China moves faster than we can to enforce. And so, Mr. Wolf, I hope BIS is successful in becoming one of the sexier places to work in government, especially if we may need 100 or hundreds more export control officers with that fairly exotic subject matter expertise that's needed in this space. So with that,
the U.S. is alone in having export enforcement in its export control agency, and I think that's a critical advantage that we have over others, given that they work with the subject matter experts and are be able to target that and not be distracted by other enforcement priorities. So thank you for helping BIS in any way you can.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back, and I want to say thank you to our witnesses for your extended period of time here, and the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses. We ask that you respond to those in writing through the chair, and pursuant to committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials. For the record, subject to length limitations through the chair, and without objection, the committee stands adjourned.